The fog had returned to London, but it was a different kind of fog tonight. Thicker, older, as if it had risen not from the river but from the very stones of the city itself, carrying with it the memories of centuries. It pressed against the windows of 221B like a living thing, curious and patient, muffling the world beyond until there was only this room, this fire, this ticking clock. The gas lamps on Baker Street burned as small, uncertain flames in the dense grey, their light struggling to reach even a few feet before surrendering to the gloom. I sat closer to the fire than usual, my medical journal abandoned on the table beside me. There was something about this particular fog that discouraged reading, that invited instead a quiet contemplation of the flames and the shadows they cast upon the walls. Holmes was in his element. He stood at the window, his long form barely visible against the grey, his breath misting the glass as he peered into the impenetrable night. He had been there for nearly an hour, perfectly still, watching nothing that I could see. "The fog speaks tonight, Watson," he murmured without turning. "Did you know that? Each fog has its own voice, its own story. This one speaks of the river, of course, but also of something else. Something older. The marshes that were here before the city, perhaps. The damp places where London's memories pool and gather." I smiled. "You grow poetic in your old age, Holmes." He turned, and in the firelight I saw that rare expression, the one that meant a puzzle was forming in that remarkable mind. "Not poetic, Watson. Attentive. There is a difference." The knock on the door, when it came, was so soft that I scarcely heard it. But Holmes heard. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and had the door open before Mrs. Hudson could ascend the stairs. A man stood on the landing, half hidden in shadow. He was elderly, perhaps 70, with a mane of white hair and a beard that reached his chest. He wore the clothes of a country clergyman, simple and well worn, and he leaned upon a stout walking stick. But it was his eyes that held me. They were the eyes of a much younger man, sharp and blue and filled with a kind of desperate hope. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice a rich baritone with the trace of a Welsh accent. "I was told you are the man who sees what others miss. I pray that is true. I have travelled from Pembrokeshire today, and I dare not return without answers." Holmes ushered him inside and guided him to the chair by the fire. I poured a generous measure of brandy and pressed it into his hands, which I noticed were trembling slightly. "I am the Reverend Thomas Merrick," he began, once he had warmed himself. "For 40 years, I have been the vicar of a small parish in a village called Trefferlin. It is a quiet place, Mr. Holmes, the kind of place where nothing happens, where the most exciting event is the annual harvest festival. Or so I believed." He paused, staring into the flames as if searching for words. "3 months ago, a young woman came to my church. She was not from the village, nor from any village nearby. She was a stranger, soaked through from the rain, with no luggage and no explanation for her presence. She asked if she could sit in the church for a while, to rest. I agreed, of course. It is what any clergyman would do." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "And did she rest?" "She sat in the back pew, near the old stone pillar, for nearly an hour. I went about my business, preparing for the evening service, and thought no more of it. When I returned, she was gone. But she had left something behind." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully and held it out to us. It was a brooch. Silver, old, intricately worked in patterns of leaves and flowers. But it was the center that drew the eye. A small portrait, painted on ivory, of a young woman with dark hair and eyes the color of the sea. She was beautiful, in a quiet, haunting way, and her expression held a sadness that seemed to reach across the years. Holmes took the brooch and studied it under the lamp. His face, which had been calmly attentive, suddenly sharpened. "This is old," he said quietly. "Very old. The style of painting, the silver work. I would date it to the late 17th century, at least." "Indeed," the Reverend Merrick said. "I had it examined by an antiquarian in Cardiff. He confirmed your assessment. It is approximately 300 years old." I stared at the brooch, then at the clergyman. "But the young woman who left it, she was here 3 months ago?" "Just so, Dr. Watson. A living woman, flesh and blood, who walked into my church on a rainy afternoon and left behind a brooch that was 3 centuries old. And that is not the strangest part." He took a breath, steadying himself. The portrait on the brooch. The young woman depicted there. It is the same woman who came to my church. The same face, the same eyes, the same sad expression. I am certain of it. I looked into her eyes as she sat in that pew, and I have looked into the eyes of this portrait 1,000 times since. They are the same. The fire crackled. The clock ticked. The fog pressed against the window. Holmes was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between the brooch and the clergyman's face. When he spoke, his voice was very gentle. "Reverend Merrick, do you believe in ghosts?" The old man shook his head slowly. "I am a man of the cloth, Mr. Holmes. I believe in the soul, in the afterlife, in the communion of saints. But ghosts? Wandering spirits? I have never encountered evidence that would convince me, until now." "Perhaps it is not a ghost you encountered," Holmes mused. "Perhaps it is something else. Something more rare, and more sad." He held up the brooch. "This object is not merely old. It is a memorial. A piece of jewelry created to remember someone who was lost. The portrait is of a young woman, painted from life, and then set in silver so that she could be carried close to the heart. Someone loved her very much, and could not bear to let her go." He turned it over, examining the back. "There is an inscription here, very faint. In Welsh, I believe. Fwyn Gariadam Byth. My love forever. And a date. 1691. The Reverend Merrick's face grew pale. 1691, that was a terrible year in our village. The records show that many died of a fever that swept through the countryside. Young and old alike. Whole families were lost. Your visitor, Holmes said softly. The woman who came to your church. Did she speak of where she came from? Of who she was? No. She spoke very little. Only that she was tired, and cold, and needed to rest. I asked her name, and she looked at me with those sad eyes and said, she said it did not matter. That she had been forgotten long ago." Holmes rose and walked to the window, staring out into the fog. When he spoke, his voice was distant, as if he was speaking from somewhere far away. "There are places in this world, Reverend, where time grows thin. Where the boundary between then and now becomes permeable, like a membrane that can be crossed by those who are lost, or those who are loved enough to be remembered. Your village, Treflin, may be such a place. And your church, built on ancient ground, may be a door." He turned back to face us. "The young woman who came to you was not a ghost. She was a traveler. A soul who became unmoored from her own time, carried forward by the strength of the love that created that brooch. She has been searching, for 300 years, for someone who would remember her. Someone who would see her, truly see her, and know that she was real." The Reverend Merrick's eyes filled with tears. "She found me," he whispered. "After all those years, she found me." "She found a good man," Holmes said gently. "A kind man, who offered her rest without demanding explanations. You gave her what she had been seeking for centuries. A moment of peace. A moment of being seen." "What happened to her after she left the church?" Holmes shook his head. "I do not know. Perhaps she returned to her own time, carrying the memory of your kindness with her. Perhaps she finally found the rest she had been seeking. But I believe, with all my heart, that she is at peace now. The brooch, left behind, was not an accident. It was a gift. A token of gratitude. She wanted you to have it, to remember her by, just as someone once wanted to remember her." The Reverend Merrick stayed by the fire for a long time, holding the brooch in his hands, his tears falling silently onto the ancient silver. Holmes did not speak, did not rush him. He simply sat, present and patient, a witness to a grief that was 300 years old. When at last the old man rose to leave, the fog had begun to thin. A pale moon was visible through the clouds, casting a silvery light upon the snow that had begun to fall. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes," he said at the door. "I came seeking answers, and you have given me something far greater. You have given me meaning." Holmes clasped his hand. "You gave her the same, Reverend. You gave her a moment of being known. That is the greatest gift one soul can offer another." After he had gone, Holmes returned to his chair and sat in silence for a long time. The fire had burned low, the embers glowing soft and orange. "A strange case, Watson," he murmured at last. "No crime, no villain, no mystery to solve in the ordinary sense. And yet, a mystery resolved nonetheless." "Do you truly believe what you told him?" I asked. "About time growing thin? About the woman being a traveler from the past?" Holmes looked at me, and his eyes held a depth I could not fathom. "I believe in love, Watson. I believe that love is the strongest force in the universe, stronger than time, stronger than death. That brooch was created by love, carried by love, and ultimately delivered by love into the hands of a man who would understand. Whether the woman was flesh or spirit, whether she came from the past or from some other place entirely, matters less than this. She was real, and she was loved, and she is remembered." He picked up his violin and drew the bow across the strings, a melody so soft and sweet it seemed to come from somewhere far away, from the thin places between worlds. "We are all of us travelers, Watson. We all carry within us the love of those who came before, and we all hope to be remembered by those who come after. The brooch is proof that memory matters. That love endures. That even after 300 years, a kind heart can still be found." The music faded. The fire sighed. The clock ticked on. Outside, the fog had lifted completely, and the stars had emerged, cold and bright, scattered across the vast darkness like diamonds on velvet. The snow continued to fall, soft and silent, covering the city in a blanket of white. Somewhere in Pembrokeshire, an old clergyman sat in his church, holding a silver brooch in his hands, and felt, for the first time in 40 years, that he truly understood the mystery he had devoted his life to serving. And somewhere beyond the reach of time, a young woman with sad eyes and hair like dark water smiled, and rested, and was finally, completely, at peace. The clock ticked on. The fire held its warmth. And Baker Street, wrapped in snow and silence and the quiet satisfaction of a mystery gently solved, settled into the deep and dreamless hours before the dawn.